समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
How do you foresee the opportunities and challenges, particularly for India-Germany ties? And then we'll come to other parts also. Yeah.
The people in Ukraine want to live in a free country, and Putin tries to prevent this.
Do you think that security, spending and militarization is going to take the lion's share of that spending?
Putin and Russia is a threat to the European Union. I think this is now a priority of the European Union to build a European defense union.
Ukrainian security is so important for Europe because Ukraine is neither a member of the EU nor the member of the NATO. And I don't think in near future Ukraine perhaps could become a member of the NATO.
This dictator in the Kremlin to take over Ukraine, what he really wants, then this is the first step to attack other European countries as well.
So welcome to a fresh episode of Worldview with Swasti. Today we have a very special guest with us who's coming all the way from Germany. He is Dr. Hans-Gert Pottering, and his best introduction is that he was former president of the European Parliament. But apart from this, he dons many hats. He's been a lawyer, historian, and he's also now associated with the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, the political foundation that is working closely with the CDU, which is the ruling party right now in Germany, and he's also in charge of European affairs in general. So welcome to Delhi, Dr. Pottering. What an honor to have you for the Worldview.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rao. I'm happy to be here with you.
Yeah. So as I was just going through your bio, of course, you have been a very, very important figure in European politics, particularly at a time when European integration was very important. But then again, you are also no stranger to India. So could you first just briefly tell us what brings you to India and how many times have you been to India?
I don't know it exactly, but I think it must have been 5 or 6 times. And the first time I came to India in 1970, if I remember correctly, when I was a student. And since I was a boy, I have always had a great interest in India, in Mahatma Gandhi, in Jawaharlal Nehru, the great figures. And I did not know so much about India and politics when I was a boy. But when I saw, for instance, unfortunately, Mahatma Gandhi had died already, but when I saw the person Jawaharlal Nehru on television later, this impressed me. And so then the interest came more and more for India. And the reason why I'm here now is for political discussions
Right.
with think tanks, with you, madam, and with other people. And I was for 2 days in Dharamshala, where I saw His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who was very, very much positive to your country, to India.
Yeah.
And I must say, I want to thank India that the Dalai Lama can stay in this country after the Chinese have expelled them, the Tibetans, many Tibetans from their homeland. And so I want to thank you for that. And India is becoming more and more important in the whole geopolitical development. And so there are several reasons, and I had beautiful discussions yesterday with students at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. This was very impressive. I think I never had so many photos and selfies as we had yesterday in the university. So I feel happy. India is a great country and we need to strengthen our relations.
Oh, that's so generous of you actually to engage our students because of course, India is a country of youth and the youth need to be engaged and encouraged all the time. But Dr. Pottering, can we just talk a little bit about your days as the president of the European Parliament? usually, of course, I want to come to Germany too, because Germany-India ties are very important, but just a little bit there, because I think the audience also should know a little bit about the importance of the European Parliament, because, the European Union has so many agencies. There's the EU Commission, there's an EU Parliament, etc. So could you tell us the basic difference between these two agencies for the benefit of our viewers?
If you allow me to go a little bit even deeper,
Okay.
why the European Union is so important. We have had in all decades, all centuries, wars in Europe, and especially between France and Germany, or France and Prussia. And 5 years after the end of the Second World War, there was a French foreign minister, Robert Schuman, who made the proposal to unite steel and coal, which was the basis for war, under a European umbrella. So it was more than just an economic question. It was a question of reconciliation between France and Germany, and that this offer for reconciliation, for peace, for European integration came from France was extraordinary.
Yeah.
And so Robert Schuman had a partner in Germany that was Chancellor Konrad Adenauer.
Yeah.
And I had the honor to be chairman of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation for 8 years.
Yeah.
And so I'm still engaged in the Adenauer Foundation for European Affairs. Then in 1979, the European Parliament for the first time was elected. And this was a great chance for me personally, because we had many candidates. They were elderly people. They had had already a great career in Germany, in other countries of the now European Union. And I was 32 years old, and so it was a great chance to be elected. And when I came into the hemicycle of the European Parliament, the 17th of July, 1979, it was for me like coming into a paradise. And I was very often asked by people, by friends, why do you want to be a member of the European Parliament? You have nothing to say. And I said, we will work hard to get competences. And today, the European Parliament is responsible for all European legislation together with the Council. That means the representatives of the governments.
Right.
And so today, the European Parliament is a very, very powerful body, a very powerful institution. And without the European Parliament, there is no legislation, except very few areas. But the Parliament is the real democratic body of the European Union today, and I'm proud that I could be a member for 35 years until 2014.
Yes, a member and a former president. So of course, that makes your remarks just so important for us to also understand about these agencies. But Dr. Pottering, if you allow me now, let's just come to Germany, the country that you come from. So much is happening in Europe. It is very difficult to put it all together in 30 minutes. But let's just start with the bilateral ties. Definitely for India, Germany is the largest trading partner in Europe. Germany is the biggest economy in Europe as well. We also see a growing interest by Indian students, to go to Germany. In the light of the recent visit by Chancellor Merz to India, which was a very successful one when he came to Mumbai and he came with a huge business delegation, etc., how do you foresee the opportunities and challenges, particularly for India-Germany ties? And then we'll come to other parts also. Yeah.
Yes, I think the relations are very important, and I'm very happy what you say as far as the visit of Friedrich Merz is concerned. By the way, Friedrich Merz and myself were colleagues in the European Parliament for 5 years, from 1989 to 1994. And I'm very happy that he found a good contact to your Prime Minister, Narendra Modi. And human relations are very important in politics. If there is no trust between politicians, then it's very difficult to find common ground for cooperation. And in the world as it is today, with Putin's Russia's war against Ukraine, the freedom of the people in Ukraine, and with the, unfortunately, the totally unpredictable president in the White House in Washington, we need to have partners. Germany, and I always want to see Germany as a partner, as a member of the European Union. So we need partners in the world, and I think India is one of the most, if not even the most important partner for Germany and the European Union. And we have to find allies like India, Australia, Japan, all countries who have a democracy, who have a legal order. And I think in this framework, the two pillars, India and European Union, and in the European Union, Germany is the biggest country, is of greatest importance for the future.
Right. In your remarks, you mentioned two distinct personalities today. That for some reason we have a lot of geopolitics swirling around them. In fact, they determine a lot of things. First, you mentioned a Russian President Vladimir Putin, and then you mentioned the American President Mr. Donald Trump. Let me come to each conversation. It is a complicated one. So, you know that in India, of course, Russia is a historical partner. India continues to be dependent on Russian arms, legacy platforms. India has also a lot of geopolitical support from Russia. So, but you have a very, very different perception, of Russia as one big security challenge. When you come to India and in the conversations that you have with us on this larger, geopolitical question, the divergence is very clear. In your opinion, how do you then frame this cooperation? How do we take the conversation forward? Because perhaps to my mind, we are not able to keep the Russia question on the side all the time because, of course, we are also dealing more and more with on security. What is your view on that?
I think the most important thing when there is a dialogue, as now between you, Swasti, and myself, is that we understand the other person and that we understand where the other person comes from. And I understand, of course, that India has special relations with Russia, and it goes back to the Soviet Union. And if I see the 50s and 60s, 70s of the last century, India was a little bit nearer to the Soviet Union as to the West. But I think today it's a little bit changing. And unfortunately, President Trump makes this policy, which he does, unfortunately. But my understanding is that India, keeping its relations with Russia, especially in the military field, that India wants to have a stronger partner in the European Union as well. And for me, Russia is not only a question of interest, it's a question of our fundamental values. The people in Ukraine are living in a sovereign country, and Putin, who for me is a dictator, I can be very open, I'm not an active politician anymore, he and Russia attacked Ukraine. And this is against international law. It's against the right of self-determination. The people in Ukraine want to live in a free country. And Putin tries to prevent this because he, as a sort of a dictator in an authoritarian system, he does not like the legal order, he does not like democracy, and he does not want to see a developing democracy in Ukraine. So this is a question for me as values. And I, as a German, I, as a European, say the people, the soldiers, the people in Ukraine, they defend not only themselves, they defend us as well. And if we don't stop Putin, then he will go further. He might attack the Baltic country, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and maybe even others. And so values and interests come together, whether you here in India see more the interest, what is understandable, but I think it's very necessary that you get to know our opinion as well.
I agree. You mentioned something called the violation of international law. And of course, from India's perspective, we find it difficult to sort of then not compare the other personality that you just talked about, which is Mr. Donald Trump's actions in what is happening in the Middle East. Now, the German position there is not an active military sort of involvement, but at the same time, there is a support. The Chancellor Merz has given his support. So, from India's perspective, we do see this kind of a discrepancy when it comes to the application of international law. I mean, I probably understand that we can have many hours of discussion on it, but briefly, how would you like to frame this?
This is a very, very difficult question. I am, since I became a politician, very much not only interested, but even a little bit involved in the question of the Middle East as far as Israel and Palestine is concerned. Of course, for us as Germans who are responsible for the Second World War and for the Holocaust, this has been a terrible past. we have to defend the sovereignty and the right to live of the state of Israel. But this does not mean that we agree to everything what the Netanyahu government is doing.
Okay.
I made a speech, if you allow me to say this, a speech as President of the European Parliament before the Knesset, the Parliament of Israel, the 13th of May 2007. And I was very clear that I said the Palestinians who are peaceful have the same dignity like the Israelis and the Jews. So this is my perception of the human being. We are all equal, where we are from, what our religion is, or no religion. And the Palestinians have the right to live in a state as well, with Israel at the border, both peacefully together.
Right.
And the government of Israel is not doing this. So they are suppressing the idea of a two-state solution. And so I'm very critical, not to Jews, I want to make this totally clear, I'm critical to the policy of the Netanyahu government.
All right. I do get it, and thanks for that answer, because it is not an easy answer to give. I mean, we all understand that, and we can have many hours of discussion. As I said, these are extremely complex geopolitical scenarios. Bringing the situation back to Europe for a while, let me also dig a little bit deeper on the recently concluded FTA and all the opportunities that have been opening. I think this is something that we tend to often miss a lot of times when we are discussing geopolitical conundrums. A lot has been happening also for the people of India and the students of India that now have a much brighter sort of future to go and study in Europe, particularly in Germany. Would you like to also, give this bit of an optimistic sort of side of the story, especially to the young generation that are watching you right now?
Yes, if you allow me first to say that the free trade agreement is of greatest, not only economic, but political importance,
Right.
because it is an indication that the European Union and India want to work together closely, not only on the basis of economy and so on, but politically as well. And so we as European Union are trying to build new partnerships with the Mercosur countries, most countries of Latin America,
Right.
now with India, maybe in the future with Japan, with Australia, and all countries who share more or less the same values. But we have to go beyond this governmental sphere.
Yeah.
And I had a beautiful experience yesterday in the Jawaharlal Nehru University when I spoke to students. I think there were 170 or 180 students present in the room. And then online, I think 10 universities all over India were part of it. And I made a speech, and then we had a discussion. And it was beautiful. I never, I think, in my political life had so many photos and selfies with these young people when they came to me and so on. So we have to go beyond the governmental level, which is very important, but we have bring the people together. And the Erasmus program, a program of the European Union supporting the exchange of students coming here to India, from India to Europe, to Germany, is of greatest importance. And I was very happy when the professor at the Jawaharlal Nehru University spoke about Erasmus, because I could say that in my life in the European Parliament, especially when I was chairman of the European People's Party before I became President of Parliament, I supported strongly the Erasmus program. The governments in one period wanted to reduce the money. And I said, in the name of our group, the European People's Party, if you reduce the money for Erasmus, our group will say no to the financial perspectives of the European Union. And then they would, the financial perspectives could not have been realized. So you see how powerful the European Parliament is. And then the governments increased the money again, and then we approved the Erasmus program.
Right. So if Erasmus is something which is not just limited to Germany, but it is something which is supported by the European Union for, it applies across the European Union countries. I think that is something
Sure.
that is very important to underscore. Just one clarification I'd like to seek from you, making use of this opportunity that you are here, right, with me having this discussion. Do you think that as security considerations become so overwhelmingly important for Germany and for Europe. Do you see that in the coming years, the EU would be able to support such people to people exchanges with the same financial commitments as perhaps it hopes to do now? Or do you think that security, spending and militarization is going to take the lion's share of that spending because money is also limited?
Money is limited, but we have to have priorities.
Mhm.
As I said already, Putin and Russia is a threat, so we understand it, a threat to the European Union and to the whole of Europe. And if you allow me to make a personal remark, I was chairman of the subcommittee, Security and Disarmament, in the European Parliament from 1984 to 1994. People laughed at us that
A very different era that
a
was,
very different era.
yes,
And
yeah.
I was already convinced then that we need a strong European Union in foreign affairs, in defense, in security as well. But at that time, there were many politicians. They said, oh, security, defense has nothing to do with the European Union and nothing to do with the European Parliament. And I was totally in disagreement. And if we had had more progress already in these times, then we would be much further in developing a unity in the European Union in the military field. And I think this is now a priority of the European Union to build a European Defense Union. And this is one priority. The other one is to support Ukraine. But at the same time, we should not forget the great challenges of climate change. I had the chance to sign the first climate change legislation, the 23rd of April in 2009. So climate change, which has even consequences for security in the
course.
world. So we have to try to solve as good as we can problems in many areas. But the real priority now, because of Putin, because of Russia, is defense and security and not allow him to attack us.
Okay, since you've been mentioning the question of Ukraine so much, and I was looking at some data also, which was released by CIPRI, which is a think tank based in Stockholm, and I was looking at the data on arms transfers, and I did see that a lot of European countries have also increased their arms spending, etc. Many major countries like France or Italy are spending, like exporting that all the weaponry to outside regions of Europe. I think the only very interesting, incredible factor there is from Germany, because Germany, in the last few years, their arms exports have gone overwhelmingly to Ukraine. Also, there is a context where Chancellor Merz has removed the constitutional debt brake, which allows for more defense spending. Could you also help the Indian audience understand here why the question of Ukrainian security is so important for Europe? Because Ukraine is neither a member of the EU nor the member of the NATO. And I don't think in near future Ukraine perhaps could become a member of the NATO. Then why is it that supporting Ukraine in this war, which has been going on for so long, is so important for European countries, particularly Germany?
Yeah, let me put it like this.
Yeah.
Our policy and my personal thinking is that we need to defend our interest on the basis of values. So, value based interests. We have value based interests. And for me, it's a deep question that the people in Ukraine, and nobody would have thought that they would resist so much to against the Russian aggression as they do, and they are very brave people. And the question is to live their own lives. So it's the right of self-determination. And Putin does not want to allow this to them. And if we allow this dictator in the Kremlin to take over Ukraine, what he really wants, then this is the first step to attack other European countries as well. Mentioned already Estonia, the Baltic country, Baltic countries, and then even he might go further. And this we cannot allow him. So it's in our German and EU interest to help the Ukrainians that Putin is not successful.
This is a repeated question that we keep asking to a lot of Europeans who visit us in India. And I think, like you said, I think the key takeaway is that we cannot have 100% convergence, but we should try to maximize convergence while being mindful of where we diverge and what are the reasons for that. But you mentioned why Russia is such a challenge for Europe today. But then there is another country which is close to you, a country that in 2019 you called a partner, competitor, and a systemic rival that has been known to support the war in Ukraine. I mean, on the Russian side, which is China, of course. But I do see that in Europe now, there is a kind of a rapprochement, a kind of a recalibration towards China. Where is that coming from? Because after Chancellor Merz came to India, he also went to China. He had a very successful trip there in China as well. Help me understand, Dr. Pottering, on how is Europe looking at reducing its dependency on China when there is a recalibration. Perhaps this recalibration is coming from Donald Trump in the White House and the uncertainty around it. But what is your view on it? I think that's a very important question that we are also looking closely in India.
Yes, thank you very much for this question. I mentioned my visit to His Holiness the Dalai Lama.
Yeah.
And I once again experienced that the People's Republic of China wants to, how should I say, wants to get away with the Tibetan culture. The people, the Tibetans who are still in Tibet, are forced to send their children to schools outside Tibet, to Chinese school, and that they learn Chinese and not so much their own language anymore. They are taken away from their parents, and the Tibetans call it demographic aggression or cultural genocide. And this is part of the system in Beijing. And if you look how the Communist Party, the government in Beijing, deals with Hong Kong, it's totally against what they have agreed with the British. Hong Kong should have a special status for 50 years. And now the Beijing regime takes away the democracy in Hong Kong. So it's a totalitarian, at least an authoritarian country, maybe even a totalitarian country. And knowing this, and that China is in complicity with Putin as far as Ukraine is concerned, we have to be very careful. And we as Europeans and Germany should not be dependent on one or two countries. And we were dependent as Europeans on Russian oil and gas, and we made mistakes in this field. And so we have to diversify the economy and the relations between the European Union and the countries in the world. So we should not be dependent on China. But China is there. China is a powerful country, so we have to cooperate. I'm very much for dialogue, for cooperation, but we should not be dependent. And I think this is a balance for the Germans and the Europeans. And you mentioned that our Chancellor Friedrich Merz went to China, but first he came to India. And this is a symbol. We want cooperation, but we want to be partner. And we don't want that neither China nor the United States of America or neither any country in the world dominates the other countries. So this is our philosophy, and especially mine. We need to be partners. I don't want to tell you what you have to do,
Yes.
and I don't expect you to tell me what I have to do. But I know we are partners, India, the European Union, Germany. We have the same, let's say, value-based policy. We have interests together. Some interests are different, but we have to speak about it. And by dialogue, one finds solutions. And I think this is a great challenge for the future, for the European Union and Germany as part of the European Union. And Chancellor Merz always sees the German position in foreign policy as a position of the European Union. So this goes together. And Helmut Kohl, the former Chancellor, and like Angela Merkel, they saw, rightly so, and I agree, our national interest always together with the interests of the European Union, or mostly with the interests of the European Union. And on this basis, we want to develop new partnerships or deepen existing partnerships, like with India. And we have to be prudent as far as China is concerned. But China is there. China is an important country, but we want to be equal to China and others.
Right. Well said, because even from India's perspective, there is a rapprochement that we want to do with China, because like you said, that in a very, very unstable order, you want to have minimum stability, especially with the big powers. And I think all countries are trying to sort of do that. I know you've been very generous with your time, Dr. Pottering, but my last question to you would be about how was this one trip to India that you made after so many years, and what are you carrying back? What are you going to say to the German people, the German government, and also the European politicians?
I realize that you in India, rightly so, are self-confident. You don't want to be taught by others what you have to do. And you know that you are a democracy, and we are democracy. And I think the most important point that brings us together is how we see the human being. I think you believe here in India in the individual person. Each person has its dignity. You don't believe in the collective, like communists or the terrible regime.
We are very proud of our democracy.
Yeah,
Yes.
or your democracy. And National Socialism, this terrible regime in Germany between 1933 and 1945, they only saw, like communists, that is the other totalitarian system, they always saw and see their own ideology, and they subordinate the person to this collective ideology. And I think this unites us. We believe in the human being as such. Of course, we have a responsibility for the society, but we share in principle the values of the dignity of the human being, freedom, democracy, legal order, what is very, very important. The National Socialists and the Communists have no legal order. They have only their interest, and if people don't agree, they are sent to jail or even be killed, like Navalny and others in Russia. So we share, you in India, we in the European Union, in Germany, values, and this is the basis for our cooperation. And if we have different opinions in one or the other case, this is normal. We are discussing it. And I think this is a peaceful process, and we have to continue.
Right. On that note, I have to thank you, Dr. Hans-Gert Pottering, for taking the time out from a very, very busy schedule. I totally know how busy and how sought after you are right now during this particular trip, and yet you agreed to do this. So we're very grateful for that. And I think two very important takeaways. One is that I think there's a growing sense in Europe at large that India wishes to be seen as an equal partner, and that is where the conversation should be pitched. And second, that the sense of history is very important, because unless we know where we're coming from, we don't know where we are heading. And I think on that note, it was a pleasure to have you, and you stay tuned for yet another episode of Worldview with Swasti.